Hello, everyone. Welcome back to POP, Progress Over Perfection, the podcast that will change your life forever. Today, we are here with Karen Adams from Financial Management 101. They teach you how to build financial muscles. We need financial muscles. In this episode, the fourth of three, and the first we talked about what is a prenup, and we talk about the wills in the second, and the third we talk about investing 101. So if you are interested about these things, go back and have a look. In this one, we're going to talk about superannuation and what is a binding debt nomination, because I don't know what is a binding debt nomination. I probably have it, but is a word that I don't use as a Italian living in Australia. Probably I don't use that word. Maybe I call it something else, insurance. I don't know, but will be very interesting because super is such an important topic for all Australians because it's the first type of investment that we have. Now, hello, Karen. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Look, you did such a beautiful job to the last three episodes, and I want you here for the next one, for this one, because I think you're the right person to talk about these things, especially because you are very passionate about this subject. Can you explain to me what is a binding debt nomination?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking me on this topic because I'm very passionate, as you know, about certain areas when it comes to financial education. So, as you know, super is our largest, one of the biggest investments that we as human beings in Australia, and even mostly in Australia because that's where our compulsory money goes into super on our behalf to help provide some more security and more comfort when we get to our retirement. But most people don't understand what's going on their super fund. Firstly, they don't understand what fees are coming out. They don't understand what investments they're in. And then there is another one that we don't understand is what a binding debt nomination is. So most super funds, and I say most, will offer this ability where you can select in the event of your death where you want your super to go to. It's pretty clear though that it only goes to certain, it's not open to everybody. So super forms part of your estate plan, right? Part of what we talked about in a previous episode about making sure part of your plan is where your investments, your house, your, antiques, jewelry, your super fund, what happens to your children if they're dependent age, what happens to your wishes once you leave this earth, or unfortunately, if you leave earlier or if you live a long life, what estate planning is saying this is what happens, and an executor acts on that. But superannuation, it forms part of the estate plan, but it doesn't form part of the will. So the will is the document that lists what happens, but super does not necessarily form part of it. So if you've got a super fund and there's an ability to create a binding death nomination, it's basically a written direction, a piece of paper that you get witnessed like a will, signed off, and it actually says to the super fund, in the event that I die and pass away, this is where I want my benefit and any other benefits within that to get passed to. And it generally goes to anyone who's financially dependent on you, a spouse. It's pretty much one or two. There's three areas that it goes to. So it's very clear. It doesn't just go to Joe Blow down the road or your neighbour. It actually says who is in your first line of person that they need to look after. And so your spouse is one, or your partner, and then someone who's financially dependent, like an independent, like a child, for example. So this binding death nomination lists that something happens, this is where I want my super to go. Why is this really critical? Because in the event that you pass early in this life, the document actually can get acted on pretty quickly by the trustee if it's valid and it's still binding, and I'll share what non-binding is. They could actually release those funds out of your super fund within up to 4 weeks in a lot of cases, right? But when you go through getting an estate plan, it takes a long time to start to unravel and unwind your whole the estate planning based on what your will says, because it takes time to go and get grant of probate to say, yes, you're the executor and you can act on that. Whereas super fund says, we are the trustee of the fund. You've given this document. We're going to pass it to your spouse now. What that does is that releases so much extra pressure from your spouse. He's already grieving as it is. for example, that the spouse is nominated, they can then actually make sure that the house is paid off or other debts are paid off, pay for your funeral expenses. It takes the pressure off. Where it doesn't get non-binding means that some super funds it's only valid for 3 years. Some say it's binding for the rest of your life. So you need to check with the super fund, do they firstly offer a binding death nomination? And if they do, you need to find that form within the super fund and get it completed and then nominate your person, the beneficiary that you want for that. If you've got one and it's non-binary, meaning that it's not valid anymore because it had a 3-year period, you need to get that redone again. But a lot of the super funds now are making it more that it's binding and it's lasting for the life of the person in the super fund. They've changed the rule.
What happens if I don't have this binding to my superannuation?
Okay, so if you don't, and in your case you don't have a will either, that makes your wife's life a little bit more challenging because she has to go and sort out, one, you died intestate without a will, and now you've got a super fund that doesn't actually take pressure off her with a binding death nomination so that she can help alleviate some pain by getting more income and cash in to help pay for things. It means that it'll form part of your estate plan, which means the executor's role is then to go and advise the trustee of the super fund that they are acting on your behalf. That's if you have a will. The executor will become a part of that, and they will then sort out where that super fund's to go to, because your estate plan tells you through your normally through a will what happens to your assets and where it's to be dispersed to. So if you don't have a will, you're going to make it very hard for the loved ones left. If you don't even have a binding, so if you have a will, if you don't have a will, but you have a binding death nomination, you've just taken a little bit of pressure off that person, because now a lump sum of money is about to come into their hands to help take some pressure off while they sort the other stuff out. If you've got a will, a valid will, plus a binding death nomination, you're actually making the executor and the person you're leaving behind life a hell of a lot easier. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Sure.
What happened when you have a blended family?
We have,
Blended family.
Right. So in the event you have a binding death nomination and it meets the criteria of what a binding death nomination who can be paid out to, it may go to part of the blended family because they meet that criteria, then that's how it'll work. So it's really about what are the rules of the binding death nomination, who it can get paid out to. So if they're a spouse or a financial dependent person, then it will get paid, whether it's blended or not blended. You can nominate that.
But what happens if the family is a blended family and there is not nomination?
Then it'll form part of the estate, which the executor then brings into the total asset pool and then disperses it as per the wishes of the person who's passed. So if the blended family, it'll go to whoever they've chosen to do it for.
Okay, but what if there is no nomination? Where it goes?
Yeah, but they've got a will. Do they have a will still?
No will and no banded.
Then it's up to the courts then to decide.
Okay, so they can be challenged as
Absolutely.
As the will can be challenged. But
because it's part of an asset. It's all forming part of the asset of that deceased person. So now you have to go and apply for, I think it's letters of administration to the government to say that we want to act. Or everybody just goes to court and says, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then that's where the court then decides, because they will appoint an appointer to handle that for you, because you have left in a bit of a mess and haven't nominated a will with an executor to handle that, or you haven't actually done the binding death nomination. So you can see why having a binding death nomination means that your super then goes to who you choose within the parameters of what the trustees' rules are.
Is actually another will.
Well, it doesn't form part of the will. It forms part of the estate planning. And so that's why we say estate when you die, part of your planning. So it does look like a will. It's a really crucial part. So, when I shared in a previous episode that my will had been stuffed up, my husband's will had been stuffed up. Mine went to him. His went to my sister-in-law. Well, because I had a binding death nomination, while we had to sort that, if he died with that will as it is, that would have got challenged and it would have been intestate, because basically, it didn't die without a will, but it would have been challenged because I'm his wife and he nominated my sister-in-law. So I would have had to go and challenge that because that document was incorrect. Meanwhile, I'm doing the grieving. I've got bills to pay, mortgage or whatever, I'm getting a lump sum super paid out so I can deal with that because he's nominated me as his binding death nomination. So one part of the stress has been taken care of, but I'm dealing with the next part now with an invalid will because the will was incorrect because it nominated my sister-in-law.
It's interesting because I think I have it, this one. I don't have the will. I have it. And it's good to know this one.
Yes, because you know what? You're going to save your wife a little bit of pain, not a lot, just a bit, because that's one part of the estate plan she doesn't have to figure out. Because if you're binding death nomination within your super fund, the document that says what happens in the event of your death goes to her, it takes a small percentage off now because she's got money, bills to pay. If you've got a mortgage, she can sweep that off if there's enough money, or she's got money to pay for your funeral. She's got money now to sort some things out while she's dealing with the next part, which is going to the government and that to try and get letters of administrations to be appointed to handle your affairs. So what I want people to do is, if they're listening, is to check that if they've got a binding death nomination, that it's still valid. And it doesn't take much. You just if you've got a financial planner, they can do it for you. Or you go to the super fund and you ask them, give me proof of my binding death nomination. Oh, you don't have one, Karen. Okay, well, can you please give me the form so I can get it completed? Get it done.
What is the cost?
Nothing. It's just a form. And it gets signed off like a will. It's very much like a will. It has to be witnessed the right way and signed the right way. And they will have instructions within that. And it's pretty clear. Now, if you don't have a binding death nomination, the trustee then is at the discretion of where they send that super money to. And if you don't have a will, then it's still at their discretion. They're waiting for that piece of paper from the government to tell them, or whoever's been appointed to handle it, where to send it. So the money will sit there waiting for instructions. If you have a binding death nomination, it gets paid out. Most super funds can pay out within 4 weeks because they've got to sell down assets, roll it in, and then send it off to wherever the binding nomination says to send it to. And that's where the trustee has to follow the rules set out of a binding death nomination, a valid one anyway.
Now, look, Karen, this information are very, very important because you don't find this information very easily, and there's many people do not know these things. So I want to thank you to be so clear on these things and it's so easy to understand for everybody. I would like to talk about a little more about the superannuation. What are people missing in their super right now that they could cost them $1,000?
One of the first things I'd like people to do is check your fees, making sure that you haven't got more insurance in there that you needed, because back then you were automatically given in a lot of super funds, granted automatic insurance cover. But if you've got insurance outside the fund, you may not need the cover in. Again, you need to check with a financial planner or check with the super fund. Check what other fees you're paying for, most importantly. Check the investment strategy. Are you in the right strategy for you and your risk level? Again, check with your financial planner. Most super funds did have some financial planner attached to them, even the industry funds where you can go talk to somebody. What else? And just making sure it works for you. I always say if you're in your 40s and especially your 50s, you need a financial planner to make sure your super fund is working for you. One, that you've got the right strategy in place. Two, you're maximising your contributions. And I'm not going to share, because I'm not a financial planner anymore, those strategies and that, but I cannot, and this is why I'm highlighting, everybody check your super, because remember compounding interest, right? Compounding interest, you got paid, say you have $1,000, you got paid 10%, there's 1,100, so $1,100. Next year, you get paid 10% again. So that gets added on to what you've already started to accumulate. So it's a snowball effect. And so that's why the compounding effect within a super fund is really important, that you make sure that you're looking at what you're contributing, where your fees are going, in the right strategy, and starting to think about how you can use some tax effective co-contribution strategies that financial planners can share with you. If one income earner is not as high as the other, you can split your contributions depending on the individual's personal circumstances. So there's a whole lot of structure with super, which I'm not authorised to talk about anymore, that you need to go speak to a financial planner to make sure a super fund is working for your advantage. But the highlight today is that regardless of all that, make sure you have a binding death nomination. So in the event of something happening and you don't have a will, your spouse or your financial independent person can actually have some money behind them while the rest of the stuff is being sorted out. And if you do have a will, you've still got some extra money coming in to help take some pressure off while you sort some other things out.
Beautiful. What are the assumptions the couple make about super that create conflict later?
I don't think there's any conflict that creates. I think people just forget about their super because they think, oh, I'm not going to need till I'm 65. And then they get to 60, 63 and they go, oh, yeah, I want to start thinking about retiring now. But they didn't maximize their contributions. They didn't look at where their super fund was invested. They didn't look at the fees. And then they've actually got less than what they probably should have if they'd actually spent the time. Even in your 30s is better off than your 40s and 50s. The sooner you start to look at your super fund and treat it like a big investment that it is, let it snowball, but just review it every couple of years, your life will be a whole lot more comfortable when you get to retire. And you might even be able to retire earlier, depending on where you invested and what you did.
Well, interesting. All right. What do you think a young couple should do to make sure that they're going to have a good retirement?
Review your super fund regularly, for starters, and look at where your spending is. If you're a person who likes to invest in super, I know a young fella in his 20s, he always put a few extra dollars away on top of his other investments into super. His super fund now is just incredible, and he's in his 30s and he started in his 20s. So it's a matter of starting early and not thinking that super is just the end of my life and I'll worry about then. It's now starting now and planning as part of your investment strategy.
Mhm. Very interesting. There is anything else that you want to talk about? I haven't asked you about superannuation.
Yeah, get financial advice early. Don't leave it too late. That's the common thing that a lot of people that I speak to when they're in their 60s go, I wish I'd spoken to someone early. And I'm trying to help them with some debt management. And I just say, go speak to your financial planner now because you've probably got 5 years. It's never too late. You may have to retire a bit later if you want to live a bit more comfortable. Then you've got to start really maximise your contributions. So please don't think of that super is an old person's investment. It is not. It is a young person and middle-aged person. And it's now when you start to look at it so that you're actually making it work for you. So when you retire, you can retire sooner. Because some people who've done it earlier in their 20s and their 30s have actually now retired in their 50s and early 60s, not waited to 65 and 70. So it is a very big beast and a great investment when you work it right.
Mm-hmm. So, if someone have a business like me and you, what is the best strategy for superannuation?
You're going to ask me that one. 'Cause I was just thinking, well, as business owners, we tend to not put money into super because we're too busy in capital growth and investing in our business in other areas. There are some strategies which you can do, and you need to see your financial planner for this, that the co-contributing strategy for someone who's a PAYG employer versus someone like us who are self-employed. There is a strategy that enables you to maximize your super over a 5-year period by putting in up to about 25, 27,000. Again, the rules change each year, where you can maximize and get some maximum deductions when the income starts flowing in your business. I always say to people, for self-employed people in particular, we're the ones that don't put our money into super like we should. And those strategies need to change. And that's what we've done over the last 12 months so that I can maximize in my young years ready for when I retire. But it's getting the financial advice. So even I, as an ex-financial planner now, get financial planning advice to make
Of course.
sure that I'm actually working towards the goal of what we want to retire on, because we've got a goal what we want to retire on, is actually working for us. I don't have time to manage my own investments anymore. I don't have time to actually keep up with the rules. I know what the rules are, but that's their job. And so we are doing a co-contributing strategy as well, because like you, I've been investing more in my business and have put less into super. And
Mm.
now it's about me investing more into super.
Yeah.
But I do have my binding death nomination, which I checked 2 years ago and again this year when we did our will. I got the lawyer to make sure that it was, and it's ticked. So in the event, while we're getting our will updated, I still had the binding death nomination in place. And that is valid
Fantastic.
for the rest of the time. So yeah, I still have to check things to make sure that they're in place as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, if you could meet yourself younger, okay, um, maybe 16 years old, what are the advice that you would give to her according on what we talked in the last 4 weeks?
I would say I was always good with money, so that wasn't going to be a conversation. I've always been good at finding opportunities to earn more money. So what I say to myself, superannuation is your biggest asset. Start putting extra away. I was fortunate enough to work for companies that paid me extra, so my super built up. But if I didn't, I would say even if you put $100 a pay or $50 a pay extra, the compounding effect now would be exponential. I wish I knew back then some of the strategies I know now about paying your home loan off faster. So I would say to myself, it's a hard one. I wish you'd give me a heads up on that one. It's look, I think because I'm where I'm at now in my 50s, super is very top of mind. But in my 30s, it wasn't. But when I got paid extra super money on top of the compulsory, it was a great benefit. I knew that it was a good strategy. But did I put extra in myself? A little bit, but not too much. If I'd known now, I would have smashed more in. Want to have more income before you have a family? Absolutely. Yeah, probably learn money faster about how to pay your home loan off. I didn't know how to pay my home loan off faster back then. Strategies are now around to make your life easy. And that's what I teach people because I don't like seeing people out of debt. I never had debt. I only had a home loan and I had investments. But if I'd known the strategies back then that I know now, I would have actually been debt free faster. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but
This is what you will tell to yourself younger, and is something very personal, no?
yeah, and I wouldn't have changed anything, to be honest, Mauro. I actually lived a very big, full life when I was younger and I just jumped in and did things. So I wouldn't change anything I did. I just wished I knew how to pay off the home loan faster back then, because then it would have been fabulous to have one of those other ones debt-free sooner. So, yeah.
Karen, we are at the end of these 4 interviews. If someone want to work with you, where they can find you?
They can find me under financialmanagement101.com.au or they can find me under Karen G. Adams with 1D.com.au. I'm on all socials. My website's there. You can search me through you because I'm sure you'll have contacts somewhere through you. Yeah, so Financial Management 101 is my company and they can find me there or karengadams.com.au or .com, same thing. They can find me there.
I know that you have even a periodic, correct? You yeah.
The what, sorry?
Periodic. What's called the things that you write about that I give you the article to write.
Oh,
What's
yes, the Your
called?
Money e-magazine.
Yeah. Okay. Give me a second.
All the
So
blogs. I have blogs as well, so yeah.
magazine. So I know, Karen, that you have a magazine as well. So what is the magazine about?
Yeah, so I called it Your Money e-magazine because everything's online today and Your Money is about you being you in control of your money. So in there, I write what's happening with market updates. So people who are interested in investing, they can actually start to educate themselves to have better conversations with accountants and financial planners. I give a highlight on not just stocks and shares that's going on in Australia and globally. I talk about an educational piece. If I've had a podcast guest like yourself, I get them to share their views and their thoughts that I think people need to know. So I'm all about educating people to have smarter decisions with their money. And you know where this started, Mauro, is when I was 18, my dad said, you need to have a super fund. I said, sure, Dad. And Mum and Dad had got theirs done. And so 18, set up my own super fund, right? So it was always good with money. And then I went overseas and 21, I went over for whatever time. I thought it was going to be 2 years, whatever. In 12 months, I came back after a fantastic adventure. And while I was away, I didn't put money into super. And so because of that, it started dwindling down with fees and all the other things that happened within a super fund. And I got really disenchanted, thinking I worked really hard and my super fund dropped by half. So it's because of that I created the Your Money e-magazine. I create blogs and I educate people because I want to make sure they don't lose money like I did, even though they work hard for it. They're better informed about how to manage it. So the e-magazine in particular is just a monthly magazine because people's inboxes are bombarded all the time. So it catches up on what blogs were out for the the last month. It catches up on what podcasts were out. So people may go, oh, I want to listen to Mauro's podcast on this that we talked about. So then they can go in and find it. Or I want to read that blog about this. So it's like a catalogue for the month of what's happened without getting bombarded in your inbox. So that's what that was about.
And if someone is interested to read your magazine, what they can do to get it?
Yeah, so if you just get onto my website under financialmanagement101.com.au, either or works, and they go into the front screen, it'll have it on, or into blogs. There's a subscribe to the e-magazine. It's free, and they just get it into the inbox every month. It's really simple.
Yeah, because I read it and I found it very interesting, and I was amused about the fact that you actually have a magazine. Not everybody have a magazine, and you have a magazine. I don't have a magazine. You have a magazine, so I think it's pretty cool.
Oh, it's been going for about 2 years now, and thank you for that, because I review it and I'm getting more. I want some spotlight guests, people who can add some more value to people's lives as well. So that's why I always get people to come and do a commentary, because they don't always want to hear me. But it's more just giving some, again, more free information and advice to help make people's lives a lot better. That's what it's all about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody that listening this podcast. I hope you like it. I hope you forgive me if sometimes I stumble my word. Remember, English is my second language. And sometimes I stumble on top of that. So anyway, see you in the next episode with Progress Over Perfection. Thank you, Karen. Bye-bye.